Good morning. Can you hear me well? Good. I'm Alvin Rosenfeld. Thank you. The United Nations, as we all know, has a long and shameful history of singling out Israel for special attack. This bias has been taken up by many others and now feeds a global effort to demonize the Jewish state and reduce it to pariah status, if not eliminate it altogether. The UN is not uniquely culpable, for multiple sources contribute to the resurgence of today's anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Nevertheless, through innumerable hostile measures over the years, the UN has been catalytic in fostering and legitimizing a now widespread attitude of antagonism toward Israel. The mood has turned ugly, and in large and small ways manifests itself in aggressive words and deeds against Jews and the Jewish state. We all know the details. They include concerted, if so far unsuccessful, efforts to boycott Israeli academic institutions, to divest from Israeli business concerns, to forego buying Israeli goods, to shun Israeli doctors, scholars, actors, architects, athletes, and other cultural figures, to brand Israeli political leaders and military officers as war criminals and threaten them with lawsuits, and to excoriate the country itself as an apartheid and even Nazi state. The aim of these actions is to weaken and isolate Israel by having it appear to be the world's chief malefactor, an outlaw nation unworthy of respect, honor, or support. In some circles, this campaign of defamation has unfortunately been succeeding. The British parliamentarian Dennis McShane, who recently chaired a Blue Ribbon Committee to examine the problem of anti-Semitism in the United Kingdom, reports, and I quote his words, that in England a mood and tone of anti-Jewish discourse now prevails whenever Jews are discussed, whether in the media, at universities, among the liberal media elite, or at dinner parties in modish London. To express any support for Israel, he continues, or any feeling for the right of a Jewish state to exist, produces denunciation and even contempt. Mr. McShane has his eye trained on developments in the UK, but the depressing situation he describes is also present on the European continent, in South America, throughout much of the Muslim world, and in North America as well. Those contributing to this virulent strain of animosity are quick to deny any link to anti-Semitism. Instead, they claim to be merely engaging in what they call criticism of Israel, which they insist bears no resemblance to Jew hatred, old or new. Professor Joel Kovel of Bard College, whose recently published book entitled Overcoming Zionism adds a special note of vehemence to this debate, doubtless speaks for many when he says, and I quote him, "We need to challenge the bizarre notion that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic." If he were in the room today, I would like to ask Professor Kovel a simple question. What reasonable person claims that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic? I can think personally of no one who thinks, speaks, or writes in such terms. And yet Kovel's loaded assertion is hardly his alone. Stanley Cutler of the University of Wisconsin reiterated a version of it in the Boston Globe a few months ago in a piece entitled "All Critics of Israel Are Not Anti-Semites." Cutler would be hard-pressed to name anyone who has said that all critics of Israel are anti-Semites. But that inconvenient fact has not deterred him and numerous others from voicing such absurdities. They frequently come to the fore when media attention turns to Israel, as it does with great regularity. Other than this country, in fact, there's not another country on earth that receives the volume or intensity of critical scrutiny that Israel does. The notion that Israel's supporters are bent on squelching debate about the country is simply without merit. What precisely is it, therefore, that we are facing here? In contrast to a serious critical engagement with Israel on the part of reasonable, well-informed people, what passes today as criticism of Israel is often not bona fide criticism at all, but a form of verbal aggression that has developed into a political rhetorical genre all its own. It has its own inner logic, standardized vocabulary, established repertoire of favorite tropes, narrative conventions, and predictable conclusions. Practitioners of this genre regularly manipulate language to claim, as we have just seen, that Jews are intent on silencing debate about Israel. While this complaint is without foundation, most purported critics of Israel seem to live under the illusion of being constantly censored and present themselves as victims of some all-powerful Jewish thought police. That, however, does not keep some of them from charging Jews with exercising undue control in politics, the media, and the money markets, with subordinating American national interests to the interests of a foreign power, with dual loyalty, with being warmongers, and various other kinds of treacherous and subversive behavior. In a work of small learning but immense ill will, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, Professors Stephen Wald and John Mearsheimer set forth such charges as these. The biases that shape this form of political discourse gained global prominence on November the 10th, 1975, with the passage of UN Resolution 3379, which maligned Zionism by reducing it to a form of racism. The damage wrought by this pernicious resolution cannot be overstated. As UN Ambassador Daniel Patrick Moynihan put it at the time, and I quote his words, "A great evil has been loosed upon the world. The abomination of anti-Semitism has been given the appearance of international sanction." Since then, and despite the resolution's repeal in 1991, the UN has continued to be a hospitable venue for anti-Israel invective. It is as if the deep grammar of the institution's rhetoric requires the verbs censure, condemn, denounce, and deplore automatically to be used whenever Israel is mentioned. In recent years, Kofi Annan and others have publicly acknowledged the UN's anti-Israel biases and appealed for them to be curbed. Nevertheless, they persist. In defiance of the 1991 act rescinding the Zionism equals racism declaration, the UN has allowed conferences ostensibly devoted to human rights and women's issues to become platforms for the continued defamation of Zionism. At these meetings and others, Israel has been blatantly subjected to verbal assaults that run contrary to the protocols governing acceptable speech among member states of the UN. Most seriously, the manner in which Israel has been treated by UN human rights inquiries, as Anbayevsky told us just a short while ago, relative to how the UN has dealt with other human rights violations, is totally lopsided. I quote Walter Laqueur, who recently published quite a good book on anti-Semitism. These are Professor Laqueur's words. Some 25 million people have been killed in internal conflicts since World War II. Of them, 8,000